Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. It's the isolation that destroys us. The solution is in community. Today on the podcast, we have Brian Cuban, author of the book, The Addicted Lawyer, Tales of the Bar, Booze, Blow, and Redemption. If Brian's last name sounds familiar, it's because, yes, he is billionaire Mark Cuban's brother. But believe me, that's about the least interesting part of Brian's story. Brian and I connected on so many levels as former lawyers, although Brian did not lose his law license, the madness of alcohol and drug addiction, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and then finally, a newfound peace in the rooms of recovery. Brian is clean and sober for over 14 years. So, coming up, Brian Cuban, the addicted lawyer, on White Collar Week. I hope you will join us. Hello, and welcome to White Collar Week, a podcast sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries, the world's first ministry serving the white-collar justice community. I'm Jeff Grant, co-founder and your host. I served almost 14 months in a federal prison for a white-collar crime I committed when I was a lawyer, so I know that it's the isolation that kills us, and the solution is in community. So let's get started. Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. We have a very special episode today. We have Brian Cuban. Brian is an amazing guy. I read his book over the weekend, The Addicted Lawyer. I'm going to plug the book right away, right, Brian.
Thank you.
Right from the outset, I'm going to plug the book, The Addicted Lawyer, Tales of Bar, Booze, Blow, and Redemption. And I'm just going to say a few things from the outset. The first thing is that I really did not want to read this book. Okay, I was afraid to read the book because I was afraid I would identify too much with it, and I did, by the way. So I'm kind of pissed off at you for two reasons. The first is that you can write a book better than I can.
Oh, I got that.
Okay, and of course I've never written a book, so the fact that you've written two is really amazing. And the second is, it's like being in a recovery meeting. For those of you who've never been in recovery meeting, both Brian and myself, we've been in thousands of them. And sometimes someone tells your story, you hear someone else tell your story. And that's what happened with me in this book. And of course, I've watched some of your speaking gigs and things you have online. So Brian Cuban, welcome to White Collar Week. We're so happy to have you.
I'm honored to be on, Jeff. Thank you for having me on.
I'm reading the book and I'm reading passages from it from my wife. And you know that what we in recovery, if you walk into a recovery room, we're laughing. People were laughing. And so I'm reading some of the things in your book and I'm laughing out loud and I'm trying to explain it to my wife. And and by the way, I met her in recovery. So it's not like she's not fully indoctrinated. And as I'm reading it to her, she says to me, "That's not funny. That's sad." And it's got me thinking about my whole life, Brian, and like how I haven't really known the difference between funny and sad, and how I'll conflate those things.
Sure. But there's also a difference between, you have to remember, when I first walked in the rooms and told my story, I found no humor in it. All right. But when you become a storyteller, there's a big difference between funny and sad. My goal is to engage people. And I've had people, it doesn't happen often. I've had people say, "I'm offended that you find humor in this." My response is, if I can't find humor in my own journey, I'll implode. So people look at it from their own lens.
The thing is that the identification that I had immediately with your story, and there's so much of it I identified with. Mostly it came from the fact that I thought that my story was unique. So even though I've been in 9,000 AA meetings or 9,000 other recovery meetings too, I still think that those little stories are unique to me. So how is it that you picked and chose? How did you curate the thousands of stories you could have told and then turned it into a book? Because you probably left more on the cutting room floor than you actually told.
That's a great question. And the first thing I had to distinguish was between lessons and salaciousness. Okay, so there were I have many stories. Is a story hurting somebody? Is a story just salacious gossip? And so I went through those kind of analysis. I basically just put together snapshots of my time not in recovery, and you remember as much as you could, and you look at pictures, remember more. You say, oh man, yeah, that happened. You talk to people. I talked to people that I partied with. Did you remember when you did this? No, I don't. Okay. But now I do. But again, the goal isn't to hurt anyone. The goal is because I have ex-wives. I don't want to hurt my ex-wives. I have stories, but the goal wasn't to hurt them because they were all part of my journey of addiction. And so unwittingly, and so I looked for is the story salacious or does it have a lesson and is it hurting somebody?
Did you feel like you needed your ex-wife's permission to say anything? Did you, or your brothers or anyone or your parents?
My family, I made sure that my family was on board. In terms of former relationships, as you know, when we make amends in the program, the goal isn't to tell someone something so I feel better about it. I've had conversations with them after the books come out, but no, I didn't look at it from that standpoint because people move on with their lives, and none of their names were used, and so they would be the only ones who knew, right? They went through this. But my family, I was much more careful. For instance, the story about trading Mavericks tickets for cocaine.
Yeah.
I didn't tell that story for probably 8 or 9 years before I went in the book because I didn't want to embarrass my brother and embarrass my family. But it got to the point where you get to a point where it's not embarrassment, it's just a story, right?
Yeah.
People move on. I'm in recovery. If I told it a year into recovery, it would be different than telling it 10 years into recovery.
Yeah. And
so you learn how to figure out these nuances as a storyteller.
Well, did your family know on some level, or did you discuss with them that this is a career path, part of your helping profession? This is a path that you're going on. You're not dabbling in telling your story. This is something you're making a commitment to, and it's got an actual business plan to it. Somewhat, you're out to make an impact.
We never had to have that discussion because they watched the process. I'm very close with my brothers. They live walking distance to me. They saw the process unfold. We talk. We're connected on social media. They know when I'm speaking and when I'm writing. So we didn't have to have that discussion because they were an integral part of my journey.
You know, where I'd like to start, if it's okay with you, because your first book was about eating disorder.
Yes.
And I haven't read the book, but I've heard you speak about it.
Yes.
And I suffered from bulimia for 25 years. And I've never talked about it with another man. This is actually the first time that I would ever talk about it with a man. So this is uncharted for me. I don't know where we're going to go with it.
I appreciate your vulnerability.
But the way it has come up is that in recovery rooms, usually women will talk about it, or it's not usually, but if it's going to be talked about, it will be by a woman. And I don't really want to reach out across the male-female border too much and engage with women too much on something that is intimate. I'm that intimate because it's a great place of shame for me. It was the most difficult, shameful, private place I've ever been.
Here's what I've learned, Jeff. Bulimia, which traditional is binging and purging, male.
Mm-hmm.
Bulimia, binging and purging, female. Shame. What is different is the stigma. So I have discussions with women about eating disorders quite often.
How long were you say a binger and purger? Because that's what I was.
Over 2 decades. It started my freshman year at Penn State back in '79. I began binging and purging, and I also developed what is known as exercise bulimia as well, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. So I was dealing with 2 eating disorders at a time when people weren't talking about eating disorders for men or women. In 1983, the wonderful singer Karen Carpenter passed away.
Of course.
And she passed away from complications related to anorexia. And that kind of brought eating disorders into the pre-digital national spotlight. Mm-hmm. But it also cemented the stereotype of it as a woman's disorder, a female disorder. I didn't know what bulimia was. It had only been a clinical diagnosis since 1976, and this was 1979.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that every time I binged and purged, there was a feeling of peace that would come over me and into my stomach for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, where I felt normal. And I felt the next day everything was going to be okay. The next day I would be accepted. The next day I would be loved. But that 15 seconds, kind of like a cocaine high, the 15 or 20 seconds goes away. And what replaces that in my gut sweeping in is shame, all-encompassing shame of engaging in an act that I didn't understand. But it felt inherently shameful. Guys just don't do that. I don't know why guys just don't do that, but it's a feminine thing.
There's kind of a visceral thing that I've never even tried to really describe. You know, the kind of feeling of there's you're on your knees and there's a smell and there's a tactile sense, and there's kind of for me, there was kind of a ritualness to the cleansing. And
sure, there are certainly aspects of obsessive compulsive behavior to it.
Were there times where you felt driven to do it, but you were in public and that you were concerned that, or you were in a public place and that you were concerned that you were going to be discovered, for example?
Sure. I mean, there are the feeling, it's difficult to recover. It's a difficult thing to recover from. And the feelings are, I often had the feelings if I ate too much at a restaurant, if I was drinking, it became much easier to engage in that behavior. There were times at Penn State in a pit law where I would be out in the bar and I would go out and engage in that behavior after leaving the bar before I went home in an alley or something, some place where I could have privacy at 2 a.m. Sure.
When did you kind of come to terms with it? When did you know that this is something that I need to get a hold of or I need to stop?
It was a progress. I mean, you get old enough and we're educated people and you understand that binging and purging is bulimia at some point.
Yeah.
But it was more the stigma and the shame that kept me from doing anything. So it was 2007 or 2008. I think the article is still on my blog from back then. I was going through a magazine. It may have been a People magazine, and there was an article about a model by the name of Caroline Reston. I believe she was a Brazilian model who ended up dying from complications related to anorexia. And I won't use numbers because it will trigger people. It's not appropriate. But she got very thin and emaciated. And there were comments on online, and this was the early days of online, from men and who were struggling. And I was thought to myself, wow, okay, I am not alone. And I think that was really the pivotal moment, reading an article about a female who lost her life to an eating disorder. And that was 2007 or 2008.
And how did it relate to your getting sober?
It was all integrated because I talked to my therapist about the drinking. It was the talking about the binging and purging did not come at the same time about talking about the drinking, because I still did not feel like I could be vulnerable enough, or there was enough trust, and I was still much too ashamed. Now I'm in my 40s, and I knew I had an eating disorder, and to talk about it. So that came a bit later. But I had already written about it, though. I had the way I was going to introduce myself to the world was on my blog, and this was an old blog, but I migrated the article to my new blog, which says I suffer from bulimia, and it was a short blog and kind of one of those things where you write and duck and cover, right? But there weren't as many people online in 2007 and 8, but the comments were very supportive. I think this was even on MySpace. I posted it on MySpace before I was on Facebook.
I'm still duck and covering. I remember when I got sober, and I was a prescription opioids mostly for those 10 years before I hit my bottom, and I was seeing an analyst or a therapist, and I no longer had the compulsion to binge and purge. And I was trying to describe it to him, because I'd never described it during the whole time where I was seeing him while I was getting high. And I said to him, I don't have the compulsion anymore. And he said to me, well, do you think that the opioids were making you nauseated? Do you think that like one was fueling the other that way? And the more I thought about it, I used to walk around with this like low level nausea, like what people describe when they take like codeine, where they get nauseous. Or they get nauseated. But I was doing a lot more than codeine, and it's so ancient. But I remember having that feeling sick, and that was all part of it. It was part of the experience.
Here, the mind and trauma remembers, even when we're in recovery. For me, Jeff, I can tell you that the urges to binge and purge, my abstinence from bulimia became a much tougher battle than my abstinence from alcohol and cocaine.
One of the things I related to is when you were talking about your childhood, and you're talking about being the overweight kid and being bullied. And so another thing I haven't talked about, I feel like I could talk to you about this stuff.
You can.
Is that I was a big kid. You know, I was a heavy kid. I was a fat kid, but in various stages. But I was, you know, I'm 6'2" now, but I was a big kid, and there were stages in my life where I was the bully, and I feel so much shame and remorse, much more about having been a bully than.
Absolutely. Let me tell you a story that's in my first book. As you know, I was bullied severely, overweight. I was fat shamed at home and at school. I was physically assaulted because some kids thought some pants were too tight on me. I went on to Penn State, and I was sharing a dorm with three other kids at Penn State. And two of the kids what was kind of funny. They came to me and said, "We'd like you to move because we want one of our friends." And And the other guy was kind of a heavy-set kid from San Diego who wore Hawaiian shirts, so we called him Hawaiian Dan. And I wrote about this in Shattered Image. I wanted to show the two roommates that I deserved to be there because in my mind, they were popular. I bullied Hawaiian Dan without mercy. And I feel guilty about it. And my next day, I don't know his last name. And I apologize. All I could do is I apologized to him in my first book. I became the bully. In my mind, the path to popularity and acceptance, whether from these kids or the girls, was to become the bully. At first, when I was in college, when I was in high school, I tried being the self-deprecating clown, and that didn't work. So now I'll become the bully, and I bullied this kid, and I feel terrible about it, and I try to make living amends. I don't know who it is. Other than Hawaiian Dan. And Hawaiian Dan, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, and I would like to tell you in person that I'm sorry. And so I've been there. I understand.
Isn't that crazy? Like these are the moments that somehow stay with us.
Yeah, of course. Bullying itself can be trauma, right? Mm-hmm. And you know what it shows, Jeff? It shows that we have a conscience.
I thank God for that one. The another thing that I'm talking about the book, but obviously it's your life. But I just read the book in the last 3 days, so it's so palpable. It's so part of my life right now. I experienced some very similar things, like trying to make the leap from college into law school and not really feeling like I deserved to be there. So can you talk about that a little bit? And then I want to tell you something that happened with me. And
sure. And for me, it wasn't about even, I didn't feel I deserved to be there and I didn't want to be there. It was the path of least resistance to being able to repeat behaviors, survival behaviors that had gotten me through Penn State. My 4 years at Penn State were defined by binging and purging, running 10 to 20 miles a day, getting drunk most nights of the week, showing up at class hungover or still intoxicated. And so, but to me, these were survival behaviors, the cycle, and I was a loner. So in my mind, this is what got me through school.
Yeah.
And I had no vision of 4 years later or 3 years later, I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the Manitow for the blow. But I was just looking at survival, the finger in front of my face. So I'm sitting in the placement office at Penn State, leafing through police officer jobs. And there are two guys sitting next to me who are from Pittsburgh, where I grew up, born and raised. And they're talking about taking the LSATs, the law school admission test. And I stopped turning the pages and I listened. And I hope you can't hear my cats going over there.
No, that's all right.
I turn off the phone, but I can't stop the cats. But I'm listening to them, and it occurred to me that the perfect thing for me to do is take the law school admission test, not because I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers. There were no lawyers in my family. I never had any conversations with any lawyers. But what I did know was law school was 3 years. And I can go to law school and I can binge and purge. I can run 10 to 20 miles a day. I can drink and I can engage in this and I can isolate, self-isolate, and I can engage in the exact same behaviors that got me through 4 years at Penn State. And Jeff, that made perfect sense to me sitting in that room. That is why I went to law school.
So what happened when now you get to law school and it's orientation or it's first day? I don't quite know what went on at Pitt, but you're looking around and there are a lot of people who want to be there. Probably 99% of the people who are there who want to be there. And you feel like what?
I walk through the double doors at Pitt Law in Oakland, and everyone's milling around the lobby waiting to be let into the big classroom for orientation, for 1 hour orientation. And I'm looking at all the people, and I'm projecting out. I'm projecting out to the girls. They all look at me and think I'm a fat pig, as I was called so often. The guys think I'm a moron. I have, and the irony about all of that is, as I projected all these things from kids who are just worried about their own stuff.
Exactly.
Right? Worried about whether they're going to make it, worried about what's going on in their homes, their whatever mental health issues they have and all that stuff. And it made perfect sense to me as I projected all this out that I should be in law school, because it's the same at Penn State. So I justified with this projection that they're all thinking these things about me, that I can engage in these behaviors continuing on for 3 years. That's what went through my mind walking into the lobby of Pitt Law day one.
And so when you were say in your first class, was it Socratic method there at
Yes.
Pitt?
And
So did you feel like you were like ready? Were you someone who did your homework?
I never felt ready. I felt, what do I do? What do I need to do to not get kicked out? Right? Because I just don't care. And that's literally how I just didn't care. The best example I can give of my 3 years of Pitt Law was my first year civil procedure class. I had been out all night drinking. I didn't know where my books were. And I show up in class, and I was hungover, still maybe intoxicated a bit. And I smelled, because I hadn't changed or showered. It's assigned seats, and my two seatmates, I'm sure, are, dude, just go home and take the L. And Jeff, I'm trying to get as small as I can in my seat, right?
Yeah.
Don't call me. And he writes, back when we used blackboards, he's writing this jurisdictional thing, hypothetical on the blackboard. I think it was a Penoyer v. Neff.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I'm just as small as I can. Mr. Cuban, what do you think of this? I said, Professor, I am sorry, I'm not prepared. I don't have my books. Please, can you go on to someone else? And there's a pause, the pregnant pause.
Yeah.
Where I'm hoping, okay, he's going to go on to someone else. Don't call me. Well, Mr. Cuban, when you say you're not prepared, are you not prepared to answer my hypothetical? What if I phrase it this way? Are you prepared now? Oh, Professor, no. I'm not prepared means not prepared. Okay, now he understands and is really going on to someone else. Well, Mr. Cuban, and I uttered an expletive under my breath, and my voice projects, and I stood up and bolted out of the room. That personified my 3 years at Pitt Law. I was not a good student, as you might imagine. I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I still have reoccurring nightmares of being at graduation, standing in the line, finally getting up to get my diploma from the dean, and he pulls it back and goes, "Psych, you didn't graduate." And he goes, "You didn't graduate. And I wake up grabbing for my diploma. And the irony of that is, Jeff, is I was so ashamed and so apathetic, I didn't even go to graduation. Just mail it to me.
Here's a story. Again, I don't think I've ever told this to anybody. It was orientation in the summer of 1979. That's when I started law school in 79. And I had been on like a 4-day drinking binge. And I showed up at orientation completely hungover, and I couldn't even focus. And it was in like the biggest classroom at New York Law School. And all the 1Ls were there. And I had read The Paper Chase the summer before, and and in fact, I noticed one of the chapters of your book is Chasing Paper or something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
So I caught the reference.
My homage to Scott Turow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whoever wrote The Paper Chase.
Yeah. There was a book 1L that came out at about the same time. Remember?
Well, The Paper Chase is based on 1L, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. But
because The Paper Chase is the series. I believe it's based on 1L. I could be wrong.
I don't remember.
Yes.
But so what happened was we got in this class, and there was one speaker after the next speaker, and one of the speakers was the dean of admissions. And he's this little guy, maybe 5'6" or 5'7", and he stood in front of the class of all the 1Ls, and he said that he's doing his doctorate thesis, and his doctorate thesis is to compare or for his doctorate thesis, he wanted to give out a test, and it would take about 2 hours to take, and the test, he wanted to be able to compare it to LSAT scores from admissions. And it would be completely optional. You don't have to take it. But then he hands it out. And I am so hungover, I can't even think. And he hands it out, and it's on my desk. And, I'm in this little kind of student desk. And instead of doing the test, I reached into my backpack and I took out a Thor comic book. I'm reading Thor. I'm just minding my own business. And he came over to me and he looked down on me, and he looked down at me and he said to me, "What are you doing?" Now, this is in front of the whole 1L class. "What are you doing?" And I looked at him and I said to him, "I'm reading Thor." And he said, "Well, why aren't you taking the test?" I said, "Because you said it was optional." And he said, "Well, what does optional mean to you?" And I said, "I think it means not mandatory." And with that, he poked me. And I stood up, and I was towering over him. And in front of the entire 1L class, he said to me, "If this is your attitude, I may have made a mistake admitting you to this law school." That was my introduction to law school.
Yeah.
And it had everything to do with lack of self-esteem and the fact that I was hungover. And to this day, I can't even believe that I did that.
Going over, I'm listening to your story, and it was optional. Right? The hungover, being hungover aside, you were in the right. It was optional. Enjoy Thor.
I read your book, and that's what I'm thinking about as I'm reading your book. That story from 40 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, I have. It wasn't a good experience, but it was of my. It was of my journey.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, deans of students, really, we weren't talking about. I mean, there was a drinking culture exponentially worse than it is today, right? Back when I was there. At Pitt Law, we had bans and hard alcohol and beer in the student lounge occasionally. It just wasn't a big deal. And you had all the bar review stuff, the bar review, right, where you go to the different bars. But the drinking culture was there, and it's not the same as it is today, although there is still to some extent, although we have a lot more awareness, and law schools look at these things much differently. But we didn't have a dean of students back when I was in law school, and dean of students are traditionally the point person for students who are struggling with mental health issues. So it was a different time. It was a different time. And I look at Pitt Law now, and they're doing incredible things to help students. They have a student wellness fund to help students who need counseling or things like that.
And so do the bar associations.
Yes. And I knew nothing of lawyers helping lawyers or, when I got to Texas and I was struggling with cocaine and alcohol, we had the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program was in its infancy. I'm now on their advisory board. And so you don't know these things. I didn't know any about any of this stuff. But here's the difference, Jeff. I wouldn't have wanted it regardless. If someone told me you can go to TLAP, Texas Lawyers Assistance, I said, why? I'm enjoying my blow. I'm enjoying going out.
So
I didn't want it.
What's with the migration, the family migration to Dallas? Like it feels like you had a very tight knit family, and everyone's in Pittsburgh, and then everybody moves to Dallas. I don't know if your parents moved to Dallas or not.
Well, it started. My brother Mark moved to Dallas in probably 80 or 81. He went to Indiana, and that was kind of the thing. It was the oil boom times, and Dallas was growing. And then my brother Jeff, younger brother Jeff, followed him there and ended up going to Southwest Texas State and then getting his, or whatever it's called now, and getting his master's at the University of Texas in psychology. And my experiences in Pittsburgh just were not anything that I wanted to, that would keep me there, right? At the time, I had a very difficult relationship with my mother, although we have a great relationship today. I had no options. You know, it wasn't like the interview boards were full, had my name on them for jobs, and I didn't care. I didn't even care. So what was I going to do? I'll pick up and move and live with the people who I know love me unconditionally. My two brothers.
So Mark and Jeff had moved first. Yes,
and then 1986, I took the PA bar exam, which I passed miraculously. I don't know how. And then Labor Day, $200 to my name. I took a Trailways bus to Dallas, and Mark met me at the bus station, and I moved in with Mark.
You write a lot about kind of middle child syndrome.
Yes.
And how that kind of informed your navigating the world, and how Mark was the tall, charismatic jock, and Jeff was the child of the family, and got.
Well, Mark was the charismatic entrepreneur. Jeff was the good-looking jock.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see.
Middle child, obese schlub.
And what was that like? Was it real, or was it like self-reinforced? I mean,
here you have to remember we grew up in Pittsburgh at a time when we're all boomers, and we grew up at a time when cell phones were two cups attached to a string, and social networking was playing dodgeball on the basketball court, and so it was a very different time. And to give you the differential, Mark was always entrepreneurial, thinking outside of the box. Even as a teenager, our local newspapers, the Pittsburgh Press and the Post-Gazette, there was a printer strike, so they both shut down. Mark and his buddies, barely old enough to drive, went out to Cleveland, bought the Cleveland Plain dealer, returned them to Pittsburgh, and sold them on street corners in downtown Pittsburgh for twice what they paid. So you kind of knew what he was going to be. He saw needs and voids and filled them. My younger brother, Jeff, was a nationally ranked wrestler. The beer parties, the prom, the dates, always had a good-looking girl on his side, kind of a wild child. I was shy. I was reserved. I trended to isolation, and I internalized anything negative said to me. And I was a heavy kid and wore it as kind of a skin-tight suit as who I was. And Jeff, unfortunately, I had a difficult relationship with my mother, and I'll tell you a bit about this.
Yeah.
But I want to make it clear to everyone watching this podcast that I do not blame my mother for anything I went through. Parents do not cause eating disorders. Parents do not cause addiction. There is a difference between cause and correlation. But things that go on at home can correlate with mental health issues later in life, and correlate some. It'll happen to some. It won't happen to others. There was fat shaming in my household. My mom would come home from selling real estate, and I'd come home from school and I'd be eating Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can with a spoon.
Right.
And she would see me doing that and say, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. These were the things my mother's mother said to her. These were the things my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. I come from a Eastern European Jewish family that had a very dysfunctional relationship around food. And my mother's mom was mentally and verbally abusive. My mom said she was bipolar. And it was a very difficult relationship between those. And it runs downhill. I don't blame my mother for that. But as you might imagine, being a tween and not understanding psychology 101, it caused a very difficult relationship for many years that was about blame and us blaming each other for what went on. And I grew to just hate myself and look in the mirror and see just a fat pig. And I was also hearing the same rhetoric at school. And that all culminated one day in what I call the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark had given me a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. This was the era of Saturday Night Fever and disco. The movie had just come out and the soundtrack. And Mark was teaching disco in downtown Pittsburgh. And he gave me these pants, and I love my brother. And I was so happy to get these shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. But Mark wasn't a big guy. They fit Mark okay. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats back there. But I didn't care because Mark gave me these pants and I was going to wear them to school every day. And I did, and the kids made fun of me. They fat taunted me. And I sloughed it off and made self-deprecating jokes. I'm walking home from school one day with these kids in Mount Lebanon, PA, a suburb of Pittsburgh. About a mile from the school to my house. We're walking on the sidewalk. I'm wearing my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. These kids start making fun of them. And then they took it a step further. They start pulling at them, tearing at them, and physically assaulted me, tearing the pants off me into shreds and throwing them out in the middle of a busy street. Down in my Fruit of the Loom tight whities, my tube socks, my kids' tennis shoes, my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt and ball cap. And they went on like they had done the funniest thing ever, slapping each other on the back. I walked out in the street and picked up all the shreds I could and walked back to the sidewalk, placed them over my Fruit of the Loom tighty-whitey private area, and waddled home. People gawked. No one stopped. I got home. The house was empty, and I tiptoed down the stairs to the basement. Yes, in Pittsburgh, there's no such thing as basements in Dallas. Yeah. Everyone in the East knows about basements. You talk about basements in Dallas, and they think you're from Mars. But the house was quiet, and I was thinking that even a squeak in the stair would alert the entire world. A squeak in the wooden staircase. Yeah, I was a fat pig who couldn't stand up to bullies. And I hid those pants in the trash barrel, hoping that I would also be hiding my shame, and they would never be brought up again. I would never tell anyone. But that's not how trauma works. That's not how shame works. Yeah. They both remember. They both thread through lives when not dealt with, and impact lives in many different ways. Impact me differently and impact you differently. And that was kind of a bright line moment for me, thinking that I was this fat pig who was never going to be loved by his mother, who loved me dearly, but was dealing with her own mental health issues. I would never have a date. I would never get married. I would never kiss a girl or go to the prom. And so I kept it to myself.
Yeah, it's a big burden for.
Shame is a big burden for anyone.
Why don't you set up the story? The story I read to my wife was, I think it was the Egg McMuffin. It's Egg McMuffin story. What were you eating when you got out of your friend's car?
Oh yes, we had been to a nightclub in Dallas, and I was running to the bathroom every 5 minutes, sniffing up a storm, and my nose is running, and I'm getting lockjaw, and I'm talking to this girl at this table with my friend, and I'm spitting on her, and just being the most loathsome, cocaine addicted douche there is in the bar. Yeah. And it's 2 a.m. He drives me home. We go to McDonald's, which is right across the street from the place I was living at the time. And I buy, I think it was 6 or 7 Egg McMuffins. And he drops me off, and I have my bag of Egg McMuffins, and I have one in my mouth. I'm eating it as I get out. He pulls away, and boom, 2 seconds after I step out of the car, I'm suddenly airborne. This car had hit me at the quadriceps and flips me up over the hood. I don't know where it came from. I land on the street, and I'm wearing this white polo shirt button down that is suddenly turning red. All the cuts and the bruises. They get out of the car. The girl's looking down at me. I remember saying, "What did you do? What did you do? You ran out in front of us." The guy shows, and I'm laughing. I'm high on cocaine, and I'm laughing my ass off at this, even though my shirt is now red with blood. And the guy comes up beside her and uses the B word and says, "Get in the car, B word." Next thing I know, they're gone. And I'm lying on the street, and this guy comes out from an apartment across the street. And he says he's a paramedic. And he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I'm okay." It turns out I had broken a couple ribs. But he says, "You can't go to sleep because you could have a concussion." So I hung out with him, and we smoked pot at his place all night. And then that was Saturday. Sunday came, and my chest started hurting more and more. And then I went to work on Monday, and I took a breath and just, ooh! And it was just intense pain. So I drove myself to the hospital, and I had fractured 2 ribs.
And did you finish the Egg McMuffins?
I did not finish the Egg McMuffin. They may still be lying in that street all these years later.
So one of the things I like about watching your lectures is that, and about your book too, by the way, was that there are actual lessons. And so and it's kind of a Nora Ephron kind of approach where you stop the action and then you talk about the lesson. Or in your book, you actually have stories of some other people as well.
Sure, which made it very difficult to sell that book.
Is that? Oh, did you have to get the permission?
Well, literary agents don't like those kind of combination books. It's either a memoir, or it's this, or it's that.
Yeah.
And this wasn't it has memoir aspects, obviously, because I tell my story.
Yeah.
But I also wanted there to be lessons from other people in the field, which made it kind of a hybrid, which made it difficult.
So let's just go down that path for a second, so how did you wind up publishing the book? I mean, this is a very raw expose in a way of personal growth.
It was rejected by many agents who the ones who many of them liked the memoir part. They said, "Just turn this into a full memoir and we'll take it." And I was adamant that I was going to do it my way, even if it meant I had to self-publish. But I ended up finding someone who believed in it and found it and got it traditionally published.
So when you speak, when you're asked to speak in front of law firms or on the homepage of your website, you have a little clip from the Oxford Center. How do you lean into the lessons? Because obviously
it depends on the lessons. If I'm speaking at an Am Law firm, an Am Law 100 firm, it's going to be a different approach than if I'm speaking at the Oxford Convention, where everyone in there uses the lingo, and you don't have to really worry about stigma because everyone in there has been in the rooms, right? So, so you can use lingo that I wouldn't use if I'm speaking to a Am Law firm or a law firm, or even a bar convention, a state bar convention, or things like that. So it just depends. Know your audience. Know your audience.
Do people come up to you afterwards and say to you, that I'm glad that you brought this to light. You've given me permission to talk about it.
Absolutely, especially with regards to body image, because people are used the discussion and storytelling surrounding addiction has become, whether it's alcohol or whatever, right? It has become normalized. Normalized body image, especially male body image, is not normalized. So I'll either get someone pulling me aside, or I'll get emails. And they are more about body image and eating disorders than about addiction.
I certainly connected it on that level for sure. And so what do you do with these people? I mean, are you currently, are you your former practicing lawyer?
Yeah, I am not. I have actually passed the recovery coach certification here in Texas, but I don't charge to help people. Come to me. I'm not the only thing I'm an expert in, and this is a whole nother discussion about people in recovery who think that gives them a credential to give advice they shouldn't give.
Sure.
My only expertise is my story and my journey. We can talk about shared aspects of that. And then I'll refer you to people in the know, if you want me to, who are treatment providers, who are psychiatrists and psychologists with an expertise in the field that I do not claim to have. I claim to have no expertise other than my journey.
I've been hesitant to talk about your brother Mark at all.
No, please do. It's part of my story. It's part of my journey.
But here's the part that, as I was reading your book, this is the part I related to. A few months ago on Howard Stern, he was in after Eddie Van Halen passed away. He was interviewing Wolfie, Eddie Van Halen's son. And Wolfie was telling the story about that he went to his dad and when he was young, and he said, I want to learn guitar. Will you teach me how to play guitar? And Eddie was thrilled. And he said to Wolfie, he said, yeah, of course I'll teach you how to play guitar. And I guess he had bought Wolfie a guitar. And he sat down and he started to give Wolfie a guitar lesson. And as Wolfie said to Howard Stern, he said to him, he was Eddie Van Halen. Like there was no shutting this guy down. I mean, with the things I was a beginner, and the things he was showing me are that nobody can play because he's Eddie Van Halen. Nobody can play like him. It just struck me that as close as you are with someone like your brother, it can also kind of be intimidating, or it could be a trigger, or it could be.
There are some good questions and issues within that. I get asked all the time how Mark's fame played out with my struggles.
Yeah,
and I point out quickly that I had an eating disorder. I struggled with drugs and alcohol long before Mark became internationally famous. Right, so you can't say that there's a connection there. There's not. I was responsible for my self-image, and not Mark. So here's what happened was when Mark became international, when he became Mark Cuban, right, Shark Tank and all the other stuff, he was always well known in Dallas locally. But when he expanded, all of a sudden I was getting approached by girls half my age. People were giving me free cocaine and free drinks. Didn't have to wait in line at any nightclub. And I had no self-image. I had none. I hated myself. So I thought to myself, okay, if I don't know who I am, I can take advantage and receive all this artificial adulation that has nothing to do with me and prop myself up that way. And I took full advantage of that and became one of the biggest D-bags in Dallas. I'm not ashamed to say, but that's not Mark's fault. I was responsible for my own self-image and for my own identity, which I lacked when he became internationally famous. So I could be Mark Cuban's brother and get all of this stuff, right? All of this stuff that in my mind, I wasn't able to get as just Brian Cuban. The dates, the kind words, all those things that I wasn't able to get as the teenage or the tween Brian Cuban. And so I was just, the self-loathing was just all-encompassing.
So, Brian, where are you now in terms of a person in recovery? Do you go daily? Do you go often? Are you
talking about to meetings?
Yeah.
No, I'm very careful. I'm 60 years old, and I'm very careful right now, even though we're rounding the corner. When I'm not, I'm not vaccinated, so I've done online meetings, and there's in the rooms, the site in the rooms, and people ask me to do speaker meetings, and I do that. But until I'm fully vaccinated, I won't be walking into a room, and that's just my personal choice.
Yeah. So for anybody watching this who's in early recovery or in recovery at all, the pandemic and our ability to have a community, a recovery community, has been greatly affected by. And I don't know about you, but I found a lot of comfort in Zoom meetings, and people ask me that question, and it is what it is, right? Do I believe it's as good as sitting in that smoky room that I've sat in for many years, where, the same stains and the familiarity of the same stains and 2-day-old coffee, to use stereotypes, but it's not a stereotype when it's true. And the donuts and all this stuff do I think that's better? Yes. But we are Zooming, and that's how it is. Will I return to the rooms when I believe that I can do so safely for me and safely for others? Yes. What do you think the takeaways are from your story? Because there are really unique aspects to your story, or at least it feels that way.
Well,
but
everyone has it. We all have different stories, right? I remember my first day in the rooms. I'm sitting there listening, and I'm comparing stories. Oh man, yeah, that's bad. Oh, yeah, why are you here? Oh yeah, oh. And I'm thinking, what we didn't talk about is when I traded 2006 Dallas Mavericks championship tickets to my cocaine dealer, and I'm thinking nobody here has done that. I'm unique, right? But the takeaway, what I want people to take away is that community in recovery is important. Compassionate community, whether it's in the rooms. My path is abstinence, Jeff. Mm-hmm. But if you watch what I do and watch what I post, there are many paths to recovery. Mm-hmm. I'm not about judging paths to recovery. If you tell me that standing on your head is going to keep you sober, or however you define recovery, right? If we look at the SAMHSA definition of recovery, it says nothing about sober.
Yeah.
It talks about leading a full, happy life, all these different things. So compassionate community is what I want people. Get your community, rely on your community. If you don't have a community, reach out to me, reach out to whoever, and start creating it, because whether it's in the rooms or smart recovery or whatever you do, group therapy, it's community that binds us. Mm. And the storytelling within that community that binds us and gives us permission and gives other people permission to share and be vulnerable. And of course, another message is recovery is possible. It takes longer for some than others, and not everyone recovers, but it can happen. And one of the more important messages I want people to take from my book is there is no such thing as rock bottom. Okay. There is recovering. Rock bottom to me is one of the worst terms ever invented, because it implies that we have to have the worst happen to us in our lives, the worst tragedy, to begin recovery. And for some people, that's the way it is. Let me give you an example of how it didn't work for me. In 2005, my brothers came into my house. There was a 45 automatic on my nightstand. There were drugs everywhere. I was minutes from using it and taking my own life. They took me to a psychiatric facility where, much to their chagrin, I knew what to say and they weren't able to hold me. I wasn't a danger to myself, others. The lawyer in me kicked in. That wasn't "quote unquote" rock bottom for me. People think that's it. You're gonna recover. No, I went right back out, and the moment I prefer to call it my recovery tipping point was my second trip to that facility after a blackout.
Yeah.
So you just don't know. And I don't like the term rock bottom. Let's use compassionate community to help people and lift up people to recover at the highest point possible before it gets there.
I can't remember now in the book, did you spend any time in jail? I mean,
yeah, I was arrested for DWI.
Yeah, right. And how long, what was that process like?
I mean, I had just gotten off my first divorce, and I was at this bar in downtown Dallas called the Ginger Man, and I was drinking and blowing and going, right? My normal state of affairs. And I lived maybe 2 miles or 3 miles up the highway.
Yeah.
And I remember my friends telling me, you shouldn't be driving. And I'm like, I'm okay. I get in the car and I'm speeding up. It's called the Dallas North Tollway. And I pass a state trooper. And I'm literally at the exit to my house, just like you hear. Woo, 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 woo. Pulls me over and he gets me out of the car. He makes me do the alphabet backwards, touching my nose, and I'm Z, F, C, missing my nose, and you're under arrest, suspicion of DWI. It was this older state trooper, and I'm still thinking I'm not drunk. We're driving down there like every drunk, right? It doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, and I'm still thinking, no, I'm fine. No, I said to him at the time you had to blow a 1-0. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah.
I said, when I blow under a 1-0, you're going to take me back to my car, right? He's laughing. He said, that's not going to happen, dude, but sure. If you do that, we'll take you back. We get down there, and I blew a 1-1. So as was my right to make the state prove their case, I pled not guilty, presumption of innocence. And the day of trial, and I stayed home for 2 weeks, not drinking, never going to drink again. I'm crying. I called my father crying. I showed up at work thinking I'm going to get fired and not realizing, that's just not how it was.
This is when your boss told you he didn't have a problem with it, right?
He said, get a lawyer.
Yeah.
But that's what my younger brother said too. Get a lawyer. It's people, not everyone automatically grasps recovery and addiction.
Right.
We grasp life, what's going on in life. And so I pled not guilty. It finally gets to the day of trial. It's a bench trial. We asked for a bench trial. I show up in my suit, waiting. My lawyer, Rich, comes out of the district attorney workroom where they all gather.
Yeah.
The defense lawyers go in there for their plea bargains and whatever during the day. And he's holding this piece of paper. He said, happy birthday early. And I said, what are you talking about? And it was case. They dismissed the case. They dismissed the case. The state trooper, who was older, had apparently retired and moved back to wherever he was from, Texas, and he wasn't showing up to testify and having to prove up the breathalyzer and testify against Brian Cuban. So they had to dismiss the case. And I said, thank you, Rich. And he said, don't thank me. And he points towards the district attorney workroom. Thank them. He was kidding. I opened up the door and I said, thank you. They looked at me like they wanted to throw me off the third floor of the courtroom. He pulled me back and said, I was joking. Get out of here before they refile.
And you had no idea whatsoever, right? You're just like in your head.
Yes. And that was in 1990. And I learned I had the 2 weeks of remorse, never drink again remorse. And I was right back out.
And did you ever drink and drive again?
All the time.
All the time.
Cocaine and drive, drink and drive. When there were times, I'll say this, and people should not think that I'm trying to minimize the damage that I could have caused. Yeah. There were times when I said, okay, I'm really going to blow it out tonight, so I'm going to get a cab. I'll call a cab. This is before Uber. Yeah. And when Uber came, I was sober when Uber came around, but there were times I did that. There were so many times I could have caused so much pain and heartache.
So what's your sobriety date?
April 8, 2007. Coming up on 14 years.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Brian, I would love to invite you to speak to our white collar support group.
Of course, happy to.
And actually on March 29th is our 250th meeting.
All right. All right.
So it's a little strange that people who've been prosecuted for white collar crimes, it's a community the same way the recovery.
Yeah, there's communities within communities. And so,
but I'd love for you to speak to all of us, because
I would be honored.
And because I don't know that, I think that we're the lucky ones who are in recovery, because we have a community and we have a program, we have a way of life that we ascribe to, and that we have people whose shoulders that we can stand on who've come before us.
That's an interesting perspective, because being involved in advocacy and, I pay a lot of attention to policy. I'd argue that people who use heroin have a community too. So it just depends on the community, right?
Yeah.
Or, lawyers who get snort blow, every week and have a community. So it's the kind of community that matters.
Amen.
And and the type of support that's going on within that community.
Amen. Well, you've been a wonderful, wonderful guest. I can't wait to have some offline conversations with you and cry my eyes out, because I have things I want to talk to you about. I can't believe.
Jeff, I am honored to speak with you anytime.
Brian, thank you so much for being with us, and God bless you.
Thank you, and I will talk to you soon. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thank you for joining us on White Collar Week, sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries. You can learn more about us on our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist. And please remember to rate, review, and share this podcast so that families suffering in silence can find us if they need us. See you next time.